Hello and welcome to a new tutorial. This will be all about how to carve a Linocut. I'll go into some detail about the various things to consider when carving, as well as some words on safety. I'll also talk a little bit about how to sharpen your tools and how to care for them as well. My name is Emil and I'm an artist and a Linocut printmaker. This tutorial you're about to watch would usually be exclusive to my patrons, but I've decided to share it with all of you. If you'd like to learn more about Linocut printmaking, consider joining my Patreon page. Besides these tutorials, I also share other content, such as a monthly blog where I, for example, talk about what I'm working on, as well as other behind-the-scenes content. I also have a monthly print club where you receive a limited edition Linocut print each month, and that's only available through the Print Club membership. So if you'd like to know more, check the link in the description of this video. And with that said, let's get started. So here you see 4 different sizes of lino cutting tools. They're all made by the same brand, pfeil, P-F-E-I-L. I have sort of like 3 different types or sizes. These 2 are for really fine details. Then I also have like a medium sized carving tool, also rounded or U-shaped, and then a even wider U-shaped one. And these are all the tools that I really use. You don't need all of them to begin with. If you're just getting started, I'd recommend just something like this. In the description, I'll write out what the actual sizes of each of these are. The file numbering system is a little weird to figure out, but if you're just getting started, I'd recommend just one tool like this. You can do a lot with just that, and then it's good practice. And then once you're comfortable or need a different size, then you can always buy a wider or a narrower tool. I'd also recommend that you make yourself a bench hook. This is just plywood that I screwed together. The way this works is that it has an edge down here and then another edge up here. So when you put this on the table, this edge will hang over the edge of the table, and you can then push up against this edge without it moving. So if you look at it from this angle, the bench hook is extending out past the edge of the table, and then because of this little strip of wood down here, and then when you're carving, use both hands and then have a positive stop up in this end. You don't have to worry about actually holding the piece of lino down. So I guess the most important point in this video is actually about safety. These tools can be rather sharp, and that's basically the reason for using a bench hook. That allows you to use both hands to control the tool. I think it's much more secure and safe that way. If you were to just use your hand to hold it down, there's a very real possibility that you would have the tool pointing towards your hand when you're holding it down and rotating it at the same time. And that can be really dangerous if the tool slips. It's a little hard to control, like the tool going through the material. So sometimes they will like skip and jump, and because you're pressing with quite a lot of force, you can really jam these tools deep into your fingers if you're not careful. Especially for smaller prints, I would definitely recommend that you build something like this. This is just a piece of plywood and some scraps that I just found in the trash that I then screwed together. You can also just glue it. You don't need this side piece, but that allows you to use it in multiple configurations. So for example, if I were working on this piece, I would be rotating it a bunch and then sometimes needing to cut this way and this way, and then rotate it again and this way and that way. And these 2 edges allows me to put the piece of lino up towards that, and then with both hands actually guide the tool through the material. It's much more safe that way and more precise as well. If nothing else, then the main takeaway of this video is to get yourself a bench hook. So if you're working on a bigger piece of lino, say something like this, it might be inconvenient to get a bench hook that size In that case, I would recommend actually just using a clamp, like a woodworking clamp, something like this, that you could use like this and just actually clamp the whole piece down. That way it's also safe. I would recommend using two, but even just using one is still a lot more safe than not using anything. If you have a wall like me behind your table, you could use that as a stop as well, kind of like a giant bench hook, but it's not as flexible, I would say. So let me actually show you how I would go about carving a section of this Linocut. I'm gonna focus on this area for the sake of simplicity, even though it would apply to any type of Linocut that I would be working on. I would start with a narrow tool and go along the lines, along the edges of the lines, and then afterwards come back with a wider tool and remove the rest of the material. As I said before, I will use both hands to guide the tool. It's much more safe that way. That way you don't accidentally have your hand here on the side and then carve towards it, and then if that tool slips, it goes right into your finger. So I kind of use both hands, one to like kind of push and guide, and then one for like final movement. So now that this piece is clamped down, I can't turn it around, so I will instead move myself. Here you see how I kind of turn so that I have the whole weight of my body behind the cut. And then just go really slowly. And it's hard for me to convey exactly how hard to press on video. That's just something that you will have to practice and figure out on your own. So in between these lines, I can't really use these wide tools. So I will just primarily use this narrow one. The reason why I like it is you can actually vary the width of your cut quite a bit depending on how deep you carve into the lino. That's true for all the tools, but it's the most significant effect with this one because because of the angle of the carving tip. Another thing that's hard to convey on video is how deep you actually want to cut into the lino. That will also just take some practice on your side to figure out once you start to print it. So let me show you how you can vary the thickness of a cut by the depth that you're actually carving with. So back here I have to make a really narrow cut and then it widens out along the rest of these lines. So I will start not going very far down into the material. And then once I need a wider cut, instead of doing multiple passes, I will simply push the tool further into the lino and then go from there. And that's one of the reasons why I like this V-shaped tool a lot, because you can actually get quite a big range of width from your cuts. Right now I'm kind of at the limit as to how wide this can go, but I think it illustrates the point nicely. As you can see, it can go from this like really thin strip to almost as thick as this tool can do, and that's kind of my next point. The reason why I only have these 4 tools is that they don't necessarily overlap, but I can pretty much make any cut I want with just these 4 sizes. Once I'm at this point, I would then either just go along the edges and then come back with the wide tool, or actually just switch to the wider tool and continue the cut. There we go, and then I will go back with the narrow tool and then come from the other side because the angle is a little awkward. And that way you can make kind of like one long stroke with different tools and make it look uniform and like that it's increasing in width, but it looks like it's made like as one cohesive thing. So now this area here, I can go back with the wider tool as well and start to remove the rest of the material. And see, right there, it slipped. Luckily, oh well, that's kind of a bummer. That's one of the downsides of lino, that sometimes you slip and make mistakes. This is gonna be okay. I don't really have any good suggestions for fixing or patching these mistakes, but imagine if I had my finger there, and that would have been quite painful. Another thing I want to mention is that if you go too far down into the material, especially with tools that don't have a tall side, you can actually start to break the surface rather than cut it. And that's something you want to avoid, because it's kind of impossible to control a breaking edge rather than cutting an edge. So let me show you kind of what it looks like if it starts to break. As you can see, like one side is clean because that's where I went in with the other tool, but this part here broke, and so the edge is all ragged. Like, go deep, but not so deep that the size of the tool like dip under the surface of the lino. There we go, and then I will just finish with this, the widest of the tools. Oops, almost made a mistake again. That's what happens when you're teaching at the same time. Oops, there I carved all the way through. Again, it doesn't really matter, but you can see the burlap backing or the Hessian backing on the side. You just want to get rid of that. So that's how I would approach an area like this. For some of the other areas, like the hand here, I would really only use like a small tool like this or this one. This is kind of too detailed, but I think I can work with it anyway. Otherwise, I just have to improvise a bit. And then there's not really much more to it. Once you get a feel for how deep you need to go, and then how hard you have to press and that sort of thing, it all like becomes second nature almost. But it definitely takes some practice, and I don't know how well it conveys on video, these motions, but in any case, I would suggest that you just play around with it and practice, and just keep in mind like the direction of your cuts and what I've been talking about up until this point. And that's pretty much it for carving. I mean, you could probably say a lot more, but this will definitely get you started. One of the reasons I should mention why I like this type of tool is the shape of the handle. Some of the straight shaped handles, I find you have to grip quite like hard to get a good feel for them. These kind of just rest in the palm of my hand, so I don't have to grip it as hard. I can just kind of push and then guide it instead of like gripping and then pushing and then guiding. So it takes less force overall, I find. So next up, I want to talk a little bit about sharpening and honing your tools. It might sound counterintuitive that a sharp tool is more safe, but in my experience, it's actually true. If you have a sharp tool, there's less chance that it will slip and either you cut something that you weren't supposed to cut or you cut yourself. Sharp tools are a must in my experience. You can do it a couple of different ways. I'm not really very experienced sharpening. I have this tiny little oil stone that I use, and then for honing I have this slip strop by FlexCut Tools. It has all these different profiles that fits the different shapes of tools, and then you can just put some compound on them and then hone the cutting edges. I want to show you kind of how I approach sharpening a tool, and I'm just going to do it with this big one. That is the most easiest to see. It's hardly impossible to see on video how to sharpen this tiny little tool. So the way I would approach this is with a permanent marker. I would actually paint the very tip of the carving tool, if you can see that, because that way when I start grinding I can see where I've ground it, and that makes it a lot easier. I'm also gonna get a little bit of water. So here you can see how I put permanent marker on the edge of the carving tool, and I have some water on the oil stone, and then I will kind of feel for the angle. So you can see that the tip is angled compared to the rest of the tool. That angle, once I can feel the angle, then I will start like rotating the tool along the surface like this, and then also tilting it to the side while I do that. If you look at where the marker has been ground off, you can kind of see that I maybe need like a little bit on this side, but otherwise the angle was correct. So I'm just going to keep going for a little bit. And there, now I've sharpened the whole edge of the tool. So I don't sharpen as often as I'm using this honing tool. The best thing would be to actually use it every time you start a carving session, but I just use it every 2 to 3 sessions. It's quite simple how it works. All these different profiles fit the various shapes of tools that you can get. It's not going to sharpen your tools, but it's just going to hone the edge so that it gets perfect for carving. So you use this compound and just rub some on one of the profiles that fits the tool that you want to hone, and then just drag it along, and you can see how the compound gets black. So now I'm going to put down some more, and then as I drag the tool back and forth, you can see that it's doing its thing. On the back side there's just a wide pad of leather and some grooves. So this is for the outside of the tool. Again, you would just put down some compound or on the leather here, and then drag the outside edge. These ridges, these grooves are for the U-shaped tools. If you buy the file tools, they're pretty sharp to begin with, so you could just buy a slip strop and then hone them. I honestly don't really use the oil stone at the moment, but it's nice to have if you damage the tip, or if you have to grind a new edge on one of your tools. So another thing to keep in mind when you're working is to take breaks, because it's somewhat physically intense. I stop every 20 to 30 minutes and actually stretch for a bit. At least my underarms here really important to make sure that you're not straining your muscles too much. Doing some rotations of the wrists and that sort of thing. It helps you prevent injuries, and you avoid like getting too sore or actually making mistakes because your hands and arms are too tired to grip the tools properly. I usually won't carve for more than 1 or 2 hours a day because it is quite physical to do. In the beginning, I would suggest only maybe like half an hour to an hour, but then once you build up your muscles, you can go for longer. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. As I said in the beginning, this tutorial is part of a series of tutorials that I share with my patrons. If you'd like to see more, there's a link to my Patreon page in the description of this video. For now, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your day.